Good morning, dear students. Welcome to teaching learning session of sociology. Today we'll discuss block 1, unit 3 and 4 of BSOE 144. Today's topic is classical ethnography and Indian ethnography. In our previous lecture, we discussed about what is ethnography. Understanding and defining ethnography, classical ethnography. In most comprehensive understanding of ethnography, both in terms of definition and its method, is outlined by Levi Strauss. So it was Levi Strauss who who has given the definition and he has outlined the definition and methods of ethnography. According to Levi Strauss, ethnography corresponds to the first stages in research, that is, observation and description and field work. So, ethnography involves observing the group under study, describing what researcher has observed from the point of view of the subject under study, and it involved an extensive field work. The researcher tries to become a part of the group under study. He tries to understand the custom and culture of the group by the view of that group, and then he interprets and write the monograph what he has observed. The typical ethnographical study consists of a monograph dealing with social group small enough for the authors to be able to collect most of his material by personal observation. Personal observation plays an important role in ethnographical study. The group should be small enough so that the researcher can observe them closely without any help. Through observation method, he tried to understand the reasons, the culture, the values of that particular group. Ethnography includes the methods and techniques connected with the field work, with the classification, description, and analysis of a particular cultural phenomenon. So this is related to field work, ethnography, and anthropology. Anthropology, they are intermingled subjects. So ethnography includes the field work. Within the field work, the researcher classifies, the researcher observes the group, he describes and then analyze a particular cultural phenomenon and produces the monograph. So in this, the ethnography, the researcher presents the point of view of the group under study. He analyzes any culture from the point of view of the group under study or subject under study instead of interpreting by applying his own thoughts or own values. He implements the values of the other. He try to explain certain phenomenon or the cultural phenomenon from the point of view of the group. According to Hammersley, for most anthropologists from the early 20th century, ethnography involved actually living in communities of a people being studied more or less round the clock, participating in their activities to one degree or another, as well as interviewing them, collecting data, drawing maps, of the locale and collecting artifacts and so on. So, in this, according to Emerson, in this, the researcher become the part of that group. He tries to learn and understand the language, the dialect of that group, and then he participates in the activities of the group, and he tries to collect the data through interview method, through observation, and he draws the map of the locale and collects the artifacts to study the culture or the phenomenon of a particular group. Classical ethnography key sign points. Ethnography is a methodology. Participant observation is a method of this methodology, and fieldwork refers to the period of primary data collection that is conducted out of the office. So, ethnography, what is ethnography? Actually, it is a methodology, and in this methodology, we use the participant observation method. And this ethnography is a field work type of a research. Field work type of a research means that the primary data has been collected by the researcher going out of the office. That is, he collects the primary data from the field. Actually, he surveys that field, he observes, and then he collects the data. It is not an armchair type of a research. You cannot conduct a field research through the office. So it is out of the office type of a research. Argonauts of Western Pacific by B. Malinowisky. This work of Malinowski is very important. He published this work in 1922, and this work is considered to be not only the classic text in anthropology but also the foundation on which troika of ethnography, that is the field work, participant observation, and learning of the local or native language, dialect by the ethnographer have been formulated. So this is one of the important text or the important work of anthropology. And this work is considered as the foundation of ethnography. That is, Malinowski conducted for the first time. The Malinowski conducted the field work. He adopted the participative observation method, and he to understand the culture of the natives. He learned the local language and dialect, and then he become the part of that group and try to understand their culture. And through this, the ethnographer have been formulated. This is one of the important work, Argonauts of Western Pacific by B. Malinowski. 2 years long-term intensive field work in 1915-16 and 17-18 in Trobriand Island reconfigured the anthropological research method. Malinowski studied the culture of the people of Trobriand Island, and to understand their culture, he did the field work, 2 years long intensive field work from 1915 to 16 and then 17 to 18. He he was fascinated by the kula, which he saw as a circulating exchange or trading system of our valuables, wherein the primitive native people stripped the commodities of its materialistic values and treated it as a symbol of exchange, fostering kinship and a group ties. While he was on this Trobriand island, and he was studying the culture, he was trying to understand the culture of the people of this island. he observed a tradition of a known as a Kula tradition. In this Kula tradition, what is this Kula tradition? This is Kula tradition is the circulating or exchange or trading. It is a type of exchange or trading of system of valuables in which the people strive the commodities of the materialistic values, and it is treated as a symbol of exchange of fostering kinship and a group ties where people exchange their valuables to maintain a relationship to for fostering the kinship and the group ties. This he was very impressed with this Kula tradition, which he observed while he was doing his work on the Trobriand Island, and he described about this in his work, that is the Orgonaut of Pacific of Western Pacific. Elaborating upon the basics of ethnographic research, the three foundation stones of field work, Malinowski stated, according to Malinowski, there are the three basic foundation stones of ethnographic research. First is the student must possess real scientific aims and know the values and criteria of modern ethnography. So it should be this ethnography work should be conducted scientifically. Students should have a scientific aim and know the values and the criteria of modern ethnography. Next is to live without other white men right among the natives. That is, to carry out the study or for ethnography research, the researcher should be able to live with the natives or to live with the people or the group under study without his or her own people. So should be able to survive anywhere with any of the group under study. And the third is he has to apply a number of special methods of collecting, manipulating, and fixing his evidences. So it depends on the researcher that how he or she will collect the data, how he or she will analyze that data, and fixing of his evidences. So he should be aware of the methods available or should have a special methods for collecting, manipulating, and fixing the data. The three basic foundation stones, according to Malinowski, to carry out ethnographic study is that students should have a specific scientific aims, should be able to live with the native group under study, and finally, the third is that should be able to collect, manipulate, and describe the data. Should know about the methods and should have the methods. Right. The next important work, ethnographical work, is done by the A.R. Radcliffe Brown in 1922, and this work is known as the Andaman Islanders. The Andaman Islanders, a study in social anthropology that is done by A.R. Radcliffe Brown in 1922, was a result of anthropological research carried out in Andaman Islands during the year 1906 to 1908, so as to understand the social institutions of tribes of Great Andaman. A.R. Radcliffe Brown carried out these studies in from 1906 to 8 in Andaman Islands, and he tried to understand the social institutions of the tribes, how the social institution of the tribes work of the Great Andaman, and this uh, study was published in 1922, the Andaman Islanders. In the process of this study, Radcliffe Brown looked into the integrative function of the institution and While studying the social organization of the tribe's social organization, he outlined two main divisions, termed as the Great Andaman Group and the Little Andaman Group, having their own distinctive elements. While he was studying about the social structure of the tribes, he looked into the integrative function of the institutions. He wanted to find out how these institutions are integrated. What is the integrative functions of this institution? Right. He outlined, while he was doing this, he outlined the two main divisions, that is the Great Andaman Group and the Little Andaman Group, and they have their own distinctive elements. So he observed that there are two groups, the Great Andaman Group and the Little Andaman Group, and they have their distinct function. For him, living as he must in for him living as he must in daily contact with the people he is studying, the field ethnologist come gradually to understand them. If we may you have has to use the term, the better the observer, the more accurate will be his general impression of the mental peculiarities of the race. So, according to the Radcliffe Brown, as Melanie Whiskey said, that is important. It is important, one of the main foundation stone, that the researcher should be able to live with the smaller group. Then, according to the Radcliffe Brown, that researchers should be able to live with the natives under study or the group under study, and while they live with the group under study, they can observe that group more accurately, and will gain the more general picture of the mental peculiarities, impression of the mental peculiarities of that specific race, what they observe, what they do, and why they do something. Right. The next important study carried out by the Margaret Mead, that is coming of age of Samoa in 1928, a psychological study of primitive youth for Western civilization by Margaret Mead attempted to answer. This study attempted to answer the questions like what the difficulties, like a rebellion against the authorities, philosophical perplexities, the flowering of idealism, conflict and struggle, ascribed to the period of physical development due to being adolescent or being adolescent in America. So, Margaret Mead was actually a psychologist, and this study of Margaret Mead, that is coming to the age of Samoa, she tried to answer the questions the difficulties faced by especially the adolescents, that is when they become rebellious against the authorities, that is conflicts and struggle of that period. This study tried to answer these questions. In the course of her investigative and ethnographic explorations attempting to underline a unique cultural pattern, Mead tried to present to the reader the summoned girl in her social setting to describe the course of her life from birth until death. She tried that the Mead tried to understand the we tried to answer the questions like the struggle, that is the rebellious behavior of the adolescents, the struggle and the conflicts and the idealism. Then she studied this Samoa people, and in her course of investigative and ethnographic exploration, she actually found that the unique cultural pattern uh, matters a lot, and Mead tried to present the reader of someone girl in her social setting to describe the course for her life from birth until death. And then she studied about this someone girl from birth till death, and according to me the culture plays an important role, how the cultural impacts the girl the girl of someone community. And here, according to Mead, the culture impacts anyone from life till death. Indian ethnography. Ethnography uses the method of first-hand written descriptions of the different cultures. Yes, it is the first-hand written description because the researcher observes the culture and then he writes about or describes about that culture. So it is the first-hand written descriptions of the different culture. It pulled together all these scattered pieces of data into a common thread and present it as a whole. It is essentially a comparative study which looks at the question about human existence from the point of view of a specific society and the cultural system that exists within it. There are three critical questions that constantly reoccur when talking about ethnography in context of self and others. The first question is, how do we know? What do we know? And how do we assume to speak for someone else? Finally, who is being addressed to? So ethnography actually uh, talks about the context of self and others, and it answers there are the three critical questions, that is, how do we know, and what we know, how do we assume to speak for someone else, how can we speak for someone else, how can we describe someone else, and finally, who is it being addressed to. So these are the critical questions. Modern anthropology of India. As we all know that anthropology and ethnography is they are intermingled. The ethnography originated from the anthropology because the anthropology is based on the fieldwork and ethnography is also based on the fieldwork. The idea of modern secular India has its origin in the second half of 19th century. There are three major areas which influenced the emergence of anthropology of India. The first of these were the colonial attempts by the British India to understand the historical and ethnographic knowledge so that they can rule India easily or in a better way. So the three areas or the three major areas which influenced the emergence of anthropology in India. The first was during the British era. That is, the Britishers tried to understand the historical and the ethnographical knowledge about the India so that they can rule Indians in a better way. And second is, a lot of societies and journals were founded and materials were displayed in the museum. This was also a way in which the subject was able to enter as well as make a mark for itself in university setup. So, second way was the adoption of this anthropology by the universities through the formation of various societies and publications of the various journals. And third is the movement for the independent India was also a reaction to the increasing control that colonial rule was exerting on the Indian state, and the anthropology was one of the ways in which this was done. Before independence, the anthropological work in India was majorly descriptive and encyclopedic in nature, and the idea was creation of image of India that was seen as an exotic culture that needed to be explored and discovered. So before independence, in the first era, that is during the British period, the anthropological work of India is is basically of descriptive type, is basically of encyclopedic type, in which the idea of this work was to create an image of the India, and it was seen that the Indian culture is an exotic type of a culture that is needed to be explored and discovered. It was only a few decades before the independence, around 1920s and 30s, that the discipline of anthropology was able to break free from the administrative change, and the studies took place in India now looked at the understanding of India from a different perspective. So in 1920s and 13, that was the second era. That is the second era of anthropology. In this era, this anthropological studies now started looking the India as a place to understand the India from the different perspective rather than an exotic culture. And post 1947, that is after independence, the discipline of modern anthropology developed as a separated field, wherein not just within the country but also at the global level it went through numerous changes with regards to its discourse, methodology, and conceptual understanding. So, actually, in India, there are the three phases of anthropology. That is during British era. The second is from 1920s to the 30s, and now, third one is post independence. That is after independence, right? Uh, in British era, it was basically concerned about the study about the exotic culture of the Indian. It was a descriptive type of a research. The second is the anthropology makes its way into the universities, and in 1947, post-independent India, there was change in the discourse, in the methodology, and the conceptual understanding of the anthropology. Right. The Indian anthropology post independence stated to get influenced by the international debates in anthropology and had discussion on the social and the symbolic values, on ideas and values, and on ideas of resistance, as well as on the concept of post colonialism. So after independent India, uh, it was the Indian anthropology was influenced by the international debates. In the years that followed independence, anthropologists conducted detailed ethnographic research in all parts of the country, even though not equal attention has been accorded to the different parts of the country. But again, the anthropologist started conducting the ethnographic researches in India after independence, and various anthropologists contributed a lot to the Indian anthropologist. In context of India, there are seven eminent Indian scholars who can be mentioned or whose work have been instrumental to the birth and development of anthropology in India. So, seven scholars contributed a lot in the development of anthropology in India, and those scholars are S.C. Roy, G.S. Ghure, N.K. Bose, D.N. Majumdar, L.R. Vidyarthi, Surjit Sinha, and S.C. Dubey. These seven scholars played an important role in Indian anthropology. S.C. Roy, G.S. Ghure, N.K. Bose, D.N. Majumdar, L.R. Vidyarthi, Surjit Sinha, and S.C. Dubey. S.C. Roy made the first attempt in 1921 to provide a bibliographical account of publication on the tribes and caste till that time, which was present in published magazines, compilation of handbook and monographs on the tribe. So the first attempt was made by the S.C. Roy in 1921 and he studied about the tribes. He published a monograph on the tribes. Second is D.N. Majumdar. D.N. Majumdar made an attempt similar to S.C. Roy in 1946 when he reviewed how anthropology had developed so far and how the condition of the study was under the British administration. Next is G.S. Ghure. G.S. Ghure is known as the father of Indian sociology. G.S. Ghure, in his article, The Teaching of Sociology, Social Psychology and Social Anthropology in 1956, mentioned how India had not managed to keep pace with the development that was happening in Europe and America. And while the British influence was still present, the understanding of American social anthropology was completely missing. So he tried to explain how the India was not able to keep pace with the development of what is happening in Europe and America, and how Britishers influenced us. Then S.C. Dubey discussed a similar issue in 1962. He highlighted the need for more refined techniques of methodology and research for Indian social anthropology. In 1963, N.K. Bose came up with the booklet 50 Years of Science in India, Progress of Anthropology and Archaeology, in which he discussed the progress of anthropology in India with respect to prehistoric archaeology, cultural anthropology, and physical anthropology. L.P. Vidyarthi in 1964 referred to the emergence of a new trend in Indian anthropology, which was the study of the village, caste, religion, kinship, and emergence of the applied anthropology. So 1900 and 1964, it was LP Vidyarthi, which referred to the emergence of a new trends of Indian anthropology. And now, instead of the tribes, LP Vidyarthi studied about the villages, about the caste, about the religion, about the kinship, and the and it resulted in the emergence of the applied anthropology. And Surjit Sinha in 1968 in a conference observed that the direction that the Indian anthropology was taking was not so much as imitation of the West, but rather to establish the Indian tradition in anthropology. So, Surjit Sinha uh, advocated about a development, about the establishment of the Indian tradition of the anthropology rather than imitating the tradition of the Western anthropology. There are the various phases of Indian anthropology, and we can divide this into three phases basically. Vidyarthi and Sinha divided the growth of Indian anthropology into four phases. The first phase is the formative phase, that is from 1772 to 1990. The constructive phase 1920 to 49, and the evaluative period, that is 1900 and onwards. What is the formative phase of Indian anthropology, which started in 1772 and it till 1919? Anthropology in colonial India was mostly undertaken by the government, in that sense that most people who undertook the work belonged to government or the Indian civil services, and few others were a part of the army. Some belonged to the medical, educational, policy, and other services. So this was a formative phase, and in India, the Britishers started the anthropology. They started the census in order to rule India in a better way. They wanted to understand the ethnography or the structure of the Indian society so that they can rule India in a better way, how they can rule India, how this could help them, right? So it was during the informative phase, that is that the anthropology was the studies were taken by the government, was undertaken by the government, and it basically the anthropologist or the who studied about the Indian people and the Indian culture. They belonged either to the Indian civil services or army or other policy makers. So it was undertaken by the government. The study of anthropology in India began around the same time that the census of country was being taken, around 1871 to 1872. So it was 71, 72 when the first census was started, that this study of anthropology and in India began. This exercise also reiterated the idea that the traditional society present in India was composed of number of separate castes, religious communities, which formed the core of the society, along the tribes existed on the periphery. So, according to this study, that Indian society is composed of number of separate castes, number of separate religion communities, and these caste and communities are then these form the core of the Indian society, and the tribes exist on the periphery. In the first attempt to provide a comprehensive anthropological data on caste and tribe was in the census 1901, which was led by the Risley. So we discussed about Risley in our previous lectures. So in 1901, the Risley provided the data in 1901. The census was carried out by the Risley, and it has given the comprehensive anthropological data on the caste and the tribes. And in these efforts, lot of tribes who resides in the interior part of the country were brought into the focus. Before this, these tribes were not known because they were living interior parts of the country. They were brought into the focus. This continued even 1911, so much so that both these census were largely considered as anthropological classics. So the census of 1901 and census of 1911 are considered as anthropological classes because it studied about the caste, religion, tribes of India. In a similar vein, in 1931, census was a very important milestone in ethnological studies as it formed the basis of classification of people of this subcontinent. So, the census of 1931 was the basis of the ethnological study because this census was the basis of classification of people of this subcontinent. In the 19th century, the common belief among the anthropologists in India was that people has descended either from the more advanced Aryans or the more indigenous and primitive Dravidians. So it was a common belief that we are the our ancestors are either Aryans or Dravidians. Risley, in his work, discussed how division among the castes cannot only be explained by the division of labor, but rather how it was hierarchical distinction between the fair-skinned Aryans who were at the higher pedestal and the dark-skinned Dravidians who were at the lower pedestal. So, Risley, who was appointed as a censor, who was appointed by the British government, and he carried out censorship in 1901, and he studied that the division of the caste cannot only be explained on the basis of the labor, what type of work they carry out, but again it was on the basis of the hierarchical distinction between the fair skinned Aryan and the dark skinned Dravidians. Aryans were at the higher pedestal than the Dravidians. His theory also supported by the anthropometrical measurements, while Crook, on the other hand, included anthropomorphic data from the northwestern provinces to show that the nasal indices varied only marginally among the castes and the tribe, and this it could not be taken as the basis of caste, which for him could only be found among occupation. So, according to Crook, it is only occupation which is the basis of the caste, while according to Ridgely, it is not only the occupation but the ancestral, but the whether hierarchy, that is the Aryans and Dravidians are the two other hierarchical distinctions are the basis of the caste division. So they differ. That is the Crook. According to Crook, occupation is this, and according to Risley, not only occupation but the hierarchical distinction also is important for the caste division. The next phase is the constructive phase, that is from 1920 to 1949. A new term came into ethnographical studies when the social anthropology was included as a subject in the curriculum of university in Calcutta in 1920 in postgraduate syllabus. So, in 1920, this anthropology was included as a subject in the curriculum in University of Calcutta, and this was a new term came into the ethnographic studies. This was the second phase of ethnographic studies or anthropological studies, that is the constructive phase. A work by Majumdar on the racial and ethnic surveys in Bengal, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, which was an important step in the study of physical and social anthropology. So, Majumdar played an important role. He carried out the racial and ethnic surveys in Bengal, in Gujarat, in Uttar Pradesh, and this studies and his studies, the studies of Majumdar, played an important step in the study of physical and the social anthropology. M.N. Srinivas' work on marriage and family in Mysore is also important, played an important role in constructive phase. Right? He also studied about the physical and the social anthropology. M.N. Srinivas work on the marriages and the family in Mysore, and he has given the concept of westernization, Sanskritization, In 1945, the Anthropological Survey of India was established in India, which looked at the anthropometric study in different parts of the country and focused on the racial classification based on the ethnic differences. So, in 1945, for the first time, the Anthropological Survey of India was established, and this anthropological survey of India looked into the anthropometric studies in the different parts of the country. And this focused on the racial classifications based on the ethnic differences. They try to study about they classified the racial classification on the ethnic difference, and they started studying about them. This was also a time period when Wimmer Elwin published a number of books on the tribe people of Madhya Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, and Orissa, which are seen as the classic within the field. We discussed about Elwin in our previous lecture in detail. He studied the tribes of the Madhya Pradesh. He tribes about the tribes of the Arunachal Pradesh and the Orissa, and his work is seen as the classics within the field. His work is very important. The subject thus matured within this period and influenced by the British line of thought and works done eminent universities in Europe and Indian anthropologists too stated to look at the Indian anthropology from the different light and started to develop their own distinct study. So this was the formative period in which the anthropology became the part of the curriculum, and it entered into the university, and thus this subject matured, and this was influenced by the British line of thoughts. Obviously it was influenced by the British lines of thought, and this was influenced by the eminent work of the universities in Europe, because many important studies were carried out in Europe, and the Indian anthropology too started looking at the Indian anthropology from a different perspective, from the different light. So this period was influenced by the Western Europe, it was influenced by the Britishers as well as Indian anthropologists started looking at a different lights at a different perspective. So this was the formative phase. And the next phase was the analytical period, and the analytical period is from 1950 to 1990. Analytical period post the Second World War and the Indian independence, in addition to British line of thoughts, an American style of anthropology was also seen. We were influenced by the British lines of thoughts in India, but again, the American style of anthropology was also important. It was also seen, and to understanding of Indian pre-literate isolate society, one that had been influenced of the British thought was replaced during the period with more emphasis on inward thoughts and study of India as a complex society emerged, with the idea of a village society gaining much traction. It was an analytical period. We were influenced by the British thought of line, but again during the formative phase, although we were influenced by the British thought, but Indian anthropologists started taking their line, and then again the American style of anthropology also influenced us, and the understanding of the India as a pre-literate isolated society, because Britishers considered as the pre-literate isolated society which needed to be studied, which needed to be explored. It was in the thought, it was this thought that the India is a pre-literate and the isolated society is replaced during this period, during the analytical period, and during this period, emphasis was given on the thoughts and the study of India as a complex society. So during this period, the thought has emerged that India is not a pre-literate isolated society; it is a complex society. So emphasis is laid on this, that India is a during this period, that India is a society, complex society, and the studies were carried out in the on the basis of on the villages rather than the tribes. Before this period, basically anthropological studies were carried out on the tribes. Now, this vision has shifted from tribes to the villages, and now rather than treating the India as a pre-literate and isolated society, this anthropologist started thinking that India is a complex society, and the idea shifted from tribes to the village study, and this village study has gained more traction. That's how the work in 1955 by American anthropologist Kim Marriott, titled Village India Studied in the Little Community, is one of the great significance of the Indian anthropology. So, the American as we were influenced by the American anthropologists also studied about the Indian society, and in 1955, Kim Marriott studied about the Indian villages, and his work that is titled The Village India, and he studied in the little community. According to him, the village is a little community, is one of the great significance in the Indian anthropology. In India, the shift was observed from more of tribal studies to now, where the emphasis was more on the study of Indian civilization from the grassroots level. That is, the shift that is from tribal studies now shift. There was a shift from the studies, tribal studies, to the village studies. Now there is now people started studying about the villages or the Indian civilization from the grassroots. Indian anthropologists like D.N. Majumdar, M.N. Srinivas, and S.C. Dubey were the important figures in the study of community and village studies. M.N. Srinivas studied about the studies about the villages in Mysore. D.N. Majumdar studied about the villages. S.C. Dubey's work is important. He studied about the villages, and they are important figure about the community and village studies. Not just influenced by the British and American anthropologists, but even French structuralists such as Levi-Strauss and Dumont and Leach influenced the study of kinship and caste respectively. So that is the British and American anthropologists studied about the India. Apart from this, the French structuralist also influenced or study about the Indian society, and few important French structuralists like Levi Strauss, Dumont, and Leach. They study about the kinship. They study about the kinship and the caste system of India. In the late 20th century, around 1980s and 90s, the understanding of anthropology underwent a drastic change. The change was a result of reaction to the caste studies. that was popularized by the structural functionalist approach by Louis Dumont in 1960s and 70s. So, Britishers, American, and the French structuralists played an important role in Indian anthropology. And in the late 20th century, that is around 1980s and 90s, this understanding of anthropology underwent a drastic change. Why and how it underwent a drastic change? It was a result of the reaction to the caste studies. The shift was from tribal to the village, from village to this caste. There was a reaction to the caste studies, and these caste studies were popularized by the structural functionalist approach. This approach by the Louis Dumont in 1960s and the 70s. French anthropologist Dumont studied about the caste system of the India, and now from villages the studies and this the people started studying about the caste system, right, of India. From the shift is from tribal to villages to the caste studies. So in 1980s and 90s, there was a drastic change in the anthropology, and it was because of the reaction to the caste studies, and which was in it was popularized by the structural functionalist Louis Dumont in 1960s and 70s. Dumont famous did he studied about the caste in Indian society. The decline from the village studies model was what allowed Indian anthropology to break out of the mold of caste and move to the larger structure within Indian settings such as class, religion, and so on. So, from village studies model to to the studies about the classes, religions, and so on. So now you can see the shift is from tribes to villages to the caste to class, religion, and so on. So there was a change in this analytical phase. The people studied about the villages, they studied about the caste, they studied about the kinship. Now they started studying about the classes, about the religion, and many other uh, aspects of the Indian society. Understanding of a great and a little traditions defined by the Robert Redfield, social and economic basis of Indian society, that is by Leach and Boss. The study of caste as a system of stratification by Srinivas among gave rise to a plethora of perspective and help discipline expand leaps and bounds. So, Robert Redfield has given the concept of great and the little tradition. Then, from great and little tradition to social and economic basis of the Indian society, that is the M.K. Bose, Leach, and K. God studied about the social and economic basis of the Indian society. Then M.N. Srinivas studied about the caste as a system of stratification, how caste plays an important role in stratified the Indian society. And there are n numbers of studies carried out which help to expand the anthropological or this anthropology or the ethnography discipline from the leaps and bounds. Post independence, the spirit of nationalism was strong among Indian scholars, which also led to creation of multiplicity of indigenous approaches to study the society. N.C. Bose developed a model to look at the process of modernization for tribes and castes. So NC Bose developed a post-independence. NC Bose developed a model. How can we modernize the tribes and the castes? S.C. Dubé looked at the Indian civilization through a six-fold classification of tradition, that is the classical, national, regional, local, western, local, subcultural tradition, and of social growth. Iravati Karve tried to explain the Indian civilization on the basis of historical, linguistic, structural, and cultural variables. The studies of Karve on the kinships are very important, and she tried to explain the Indian civilization on the basis of historical, linguistic, structural, and cultural variable. Burman, then B.K. Burman tried to understand the India in terms of socio-political process and developed a concept of notion and of nation and subnation. Aman Srinivas came up with the mobility model to understand the social change. Sujit Sinha posted tribes and caste at the two opposite continuum and in order to understand the social structure of the Indian society. So Surjit Sinha posted the tribes and caste at the two opposite continuum, and why he posted it on the two opposite continuum in order to understand the social structure of Indian society. And that's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.